And we were chatting before, and we were chatting about the concept of Indigenous cultures and certain things not being forgotten. So while we don't normally do this on the show, we are going to do a land acknowledgement tonight. I've chosen, since I'm the one introducing the show, to do one from Toronto. So I'm just going to say that we acknowledge the land we were meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Ashnabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And thanks for bringing that up for us, Okimakhan. We love learning on the show, and it's so nice to learn even a new title. And I want to ask you about that a little later on. But we respect all that stuff, and we're really glad you brought that up for us. Now, my first question, and I wanted to jump in because your art, Okichitaw,
Mhm.
uh, am I saying that correctly?
Yep. Yep.
Great. So this is something that is an Indigenous Canadian art. And, you know, when I'm going and I'm doing my BJJ, well, it's got Brazilian in the title. And when I go train with my senseis on the call, it's an Okinawan martial art. And so we're actually in Canada not doing Indigenous to Canada arts, arguable given the pathway they've taken, but no. Whereas when an Okinawan student in 1905 was doing karate, they were doing an Indigenous art. How important is it for an art to be indigenous to the place in which people are practicing it, and why?
Well, I think, just having the experience of seeing other martial artists and other systems throughout the globe that are particularly indigenous in their craft and applications like that, it really drives the passion for myself as well. And, you mentioned Canada in there, and we still don't identify it as a Canadian art. We identify it as an indigenous art that is
Sure.
actually within Canada, right? And so that's how we got that recognized through UNESCO, the United Nations of Culture and Science. So, as a tangible asset to Canada, and so it's kind of a unique thing. But I think having said that is, I just remember from my father and my uncles, they would always say that, if you lose language, you strike someone every time they speak their traditional language or practice their culture and do things to aggressively change who they are, people will lose their history and their identity. And that's something that is very, very important with us is that, O-ki-chi-taw helps build that structure of, spiritual connection with our history and our ancestors. And so it's really, really important that, when I'm practicing this or, learned all these things from the past, keeping them modern and everything, when I talk to other martial artists that are very pure in the traditional sense, we're speaking the same language. It's
Right.
it's it's fascinating, and I think it's something that needs to be done more than ever as we start, moving through the technological age.
Yeah.
Is that historical application of what our ancestors did, the movements, the body mechanics, everything, are just important now than ever before.
Well, we're really classically rooted, all of us on this show. So you're
Yeah.
speaking our language already. And without fear of offending any of us who weren't born in Okinawa or Japan, what do you think's lacking when somebody doesn't have that direct connection to what would be an indigenous art to where they're from?
Well, I think what it is that it's just like any other, look at it this way. If you're practicing something like Taekwondo, you're learning Korean culture, Japanese arts, you're learning the Japanese culture, Kung Fu, Asian, Chinese, all Filipino arnis, like all these different things that are tied to a cultural background. And whenever you practice that art, even the commands and some of the language are applied within the martial art. Look at what you teach your students, and you're not saying what it is in English right off the bat. There's a Japanese word to that. No different than in Okichitaw. Like there's Cree words that say, well, we didn't do that. We actually would strike that person right here, and so that language, like the idea of blocking and things like that, you don't hear that. It's like you counter hit everything. And so some of those languages that are indigenous to any part of the globe are applied to the martial art as a result of the time that they were taught. And what I think is beautiful about martial arts in just general is what you're doing right now was done 50, 60, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 1,000 years ago. And it's fascinating that all this stuff, evolution and modern science and artificial intelligence, we're going through all this stuff right now, but those mechanics are still the same. They never change. They really don't. They really don't. And so that's what I love. I love the fact of the tradition and the culture that's tied to it because you always learn more about a culture when you practice through its movements. I really believe that. Like, and you have appreciation for it. You really do.
We're going to go around the horn on this, but this is only tangentially related. But today on Threads, somebody was posting asking about their steps. Their step counter is 10,000 or 15,000, right? And a friend of mine said it's really weird that we've added a computer to our wrist to tell us how many of something we're doing that we used to just do as a bodily function.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we needed a computer to loop back to remembering we walk.
Yeah.
And I feel like
I think one of the things is that maybe put that on your watch right now and find out what your body feels like at 10,000, then take it off. And when your body feels like that again, you know, you have to push harder. Like you don't have to keep looking at your watch, right? You really don't, you know?
Sensei Suino, I want to go to you because, with the long unbroken lineage of your sword style, but also arguably of any of us, you're closest to the source in terms of what would be indigenous Japanese art simply because the time you've spent there, but also being able to speak the language. So crack open for us your thoughts on being close to the source and what the limits are to not being indigenous versus what the benefits are to getting in touch with it. And where do you want to go with any of this?
Yeah, boy, I don't know exactly how I can speak on this. I will, here's what I'll say. I had studied martial arts here in the States for 20 years, pretty devotedly, and then moved to Tokyo and discovered, as they say, there's levels to this stuff. And I don't just mean the technical skills of the teachers, but this whole cultural, everything around it was different. There was more reverence. More specificity about the reason you do certain things in certain ways. Obviously, greater technical skill, um, and when I hit the shores, that stuff hit me like a wave. But then, in a matter of a few months, training at my teacher's house for 3 hours every Thursday, and after a while, I that all that went away, and I was just there training with my teacher. Um, so I had the experience, but I don't know if I have any coherent conclusions to draw from it at this point.
Well, let me add one question then. And again, I think we've discussed this in early episodes, but just the language itself, being able to understand in the language in which the concept was created. Did you find that made a huge difference, or does roundhouse kicks suffice for a Mwashigari?
I think that's a really good point. The Japanese language is really interesting because in many ways it's very literal. A lot of things are just, round punch. But then there's a
Right.
lot of connotation, a lot of alliteration, a lot of historical underpinnings to words, and not only the words, but the way they're written, the shape of the kanji and things like that. So that's a very deep pool, which I got a little ways into in my time there. Um, it's still fascinating to me. I feel like uh, I went pretty far down the road into martial arts, but I only went a little ways down the road and at the time in really understanding the culture.
Right on. Sensei Dauphin, where do you go with any of these ideas? Where do you want to take it?
I don't know. I just have feelings right now based on what Okimakhan said and what we've been talking about. And some of the feelings that I have um, are based on the words that we use as we describe things, right? We call things a classical martial art or a traditional martial art. And then sometimes we call things a sport martial art or practical martial art. Um, and I guess when my mind is going to traditional or classical, I don't think you really can embrace that without parts of the culture um, being part of you as you get into it. That's a thought that I have. And for me, my family history is fairly obscure to me. Like I can't trace it back. I mean, actually, Sense Legacy, I was pronouncing my own last name incorrectly until I met Sense Legacy, and he said, "You know, you're saying your name wrong, right?" Um, because it's a French name, and even though I'm French by history, my parents didn't speak it, and nobody really spoke it to me. Um, so classical martial arts, I find for me, and embracing a little bit of the history and the culture of those particular arts gives me something that maybe I lost in my own family. So that's one of the reasons why I gravitate towards classical martial arts is because of that history. I like that history and that long-standing history and how it's interwoven with the cultures of those societies. I mean, I'm always reading books about these topics. So
Thanks, Sensei Do. Hanshi Legacy, where do you go with any concept of Indigenous art and the importance of understanding the culture from which it came versus doing Okinawan things in Canada?
Well, um, and learning what it is to start with, and then the gratitude and the understanding of um, their ways. Historically, at what time was it, and the place and time. Let's say it might have been during a wartime or something to that effect, or was it during peacetime? Some of the art, you may have some reasons for the art. In war, people get hurt and stuff like that. So, how important that art really is, or whether it has been pressure tested, and that would give you some of the background of the persons, like Okinawans or uh, Micmac Indians, which I'm, um, I have this very small percentage of myself being a Micmac from the East Coast. So I sort of understand that a little bit, but I'm talking about the martial arts and what's going on at the time. Why did Okinawans invent karate and shorin-ryu and so on and so on? So karate jutsu and karate do, which goes on today, is different than karate jutsu because their mind was to kill the opponent and defend their uh, their homes. So I find that the history is very rich, and um, I go to have a friend whose wife is Micmac also, and I love going and seeing the powwows. They look so great to me.
Thanks, Hanshi. I think about it. I can speak both French and German, and when I watch TV shows, the translation's never right. When you watch the subtitles, it always misses some nuance. And so I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. Like, uh, you know, I think of myself as doing Okinawan karate that's in Canada, and who knows what it would have looked like in 1840. And it'd be nice to see, but I'm not sure how important that is today, other than to try, because the spirit of trying to understand, and even those translations on subtitles, they're in a good spirit. They're just not quite right. And they do miss something. And I always think about that. I'm like, man, what am I missing in the nuance level? Okimakhan, let's come back to you in case you want to add any thoughts, given that we just said a whole bunch of stuff before we get into our introductions.
Well, I just loved how you talked about the difference between peacetime and wartime, and absolutely right. There's a big difference between those two. And, a lot of the martial arts that are being taught right now are being taught through a period of peacetime, technically, when you think of it. And, the other side of it is that, there's that old saying is that the best classroom does not have any walls in it. And, Okichitaw is very much like that. It's all a land-based system. And so, it's always a challenge trying to teach it in a modern concept. I'm going, guys, normally this was done like in really rough weather, or we do that in this type of period, those types of applications. And I'm sure that the arts that you're learning and that you're taught, I'm sure a lot of times that those arts were taught in a natural environment as well. And so, this four-wall concept with the hardwood floors and the matted padding floors and everything, that's just a modern application to what we're trying to teach here in a safe environment. Historically, we didn't really teach safely, did we? Either you did it or you didn't. And it's like when the horse comes back with no one on the saddle, something's happened. So it's just, a different time, But you guys, laid some great ideas there that resonate with us as well.
Well, I love that. And thanks for kickstarting this discussion so well. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. And if you're watching on YouTube and you're not watching in real time or you're listening on the podcast, hit the subscribe, hit the like, get into big fights in the comments. We love your traffic. Share it with your friends. And we look forward to seeing what those comments are. But if you're here in real time on the Zoom, we're so happy you're here. You're part of this living history that we're creating. And Sensei Dauphin's going to light up the chat button at the bottom of the screen. We want your questions for either Okimakhan, George Lepine, or any of us in and around the topic we're discussing. And again, each week I get to introduce my co-hosts, Sensei Randy Dauphin, Sensei Nicolas Suino, and Hachi Gary Legacy. And I mentioned it last week. This weekend on February 14th, we'll be at the Matsumura Challenge, which is the invitational tournament that our club hosts every year and has been doing for almost 50 years now. But also, I just want to say, I love this discussion about what Indigenous martial arts is. And even though I haven't learned an Okinawan art in Okinawa or Japanese sword arts or Brazilian arts in Brazil, I've trained them there, but not learned them there. I just want to say thanks to my instructors for bringing as pure a version as possible through the pathway from whence it came. So that's my simple introduction for all my teachers who are my co-hosts. And I'm going to give it to you, Sensei Dauphin.
Thanks, Sean. I'm really excited to be introducing Okimakhan George Lepine tonight. And if you don't know that Okimakhan, the meaning is teacher in the Plains-Cree language. At least that's what I've researched on that. Okimakhan Lepine has several decades of martial arts and fitness experience, and from an early age, he learned historical games, hunting, trapping, tactics, and other traditional practice in the Plains-Cree. I'm really sorry, Okimakhan. I'm gonna probably butcher some pronunciations, and please feel free to interrupt me.
Hey, as long as they're, the difference between the Cree is this and the Mohawks are like this. Okay?
Okay.
And we were talking about Mi'kmaq. Let's even go longer, right? So it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. Rooted in his Plains-Cree-Michif Indigenous heritage. He's also a direct descendant of Ambroise-Didyme Lepine, Adjutant-General to Louis Riel during the Red River Resistance of 1869 to 1870. Pivotal event that led Manitoba actually into entering Confederation. In addition, Okimakhan Lepine has studied lots of martial arts, including Judo, Taekwondo, Hapkido, with dedicating decades of researching Indigenous tactical applications, warfare, and combat practices from his traditional territory. Through extensive research, interviews, and elders and keepers of traditional knowledge and personal experience, he established Canada's only structured indigenous martial arts combat system, O-ki-chi-taw, a combative art based on Northern Plains Indigenous techniques and tactics, including traditional weapons such as tomahawk, lance, gunstock, warclub, and knife. He's based at the Native Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto. Okimakhan Lepine conducts seminars and workshops across North America and provides consulting for media and academic purposes while continuing his work to preserve relative and professional recognize O-ki-chi-taw on the world stage. That's my formal introduction for Okimakhan. I want to say when you look, anybody who decides that they're going to dig into history, and I don't want to say reinvent something, but bring it back to light, I guess, like really put it into a more prominent position. That's somebody who's really dedicated and devoted to military traditions. I'm really excited to have you on the show, and I'm really excited to learn from you tonight. And, I'm really excited to have you part of this history that we are trying to create, because we've had many, many people on here from different cultures, and it will be great to learn from you tonight. And thank you very much for coming on the show.
Welcome. Hi.
Okimakhan, before we get started, am I right that you're over on Spadina at the Native
Yeah.
Culture?
So and we're building another studio at Broadview and Danforth, and so we have a lot of our students that are within the core area of Toronto. So lot of transit users
Yep.
or walking users, we call them. And so I mean, we could always go out of the city and get a nice big warehouse, but it's just better to have these smaller areas that are much more intimate. So we run programs at the Native Center for communities, or community people. And then the other studio will be more kind of in camera for specialized training and things like that. Everything from knife applications, archery, you name it, it'll be done in there. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I want to get to your story very quickly, but I've been sober a long time and I've been to a ton of 12-step meetings at that building.
Okay, yeah.
I shoot photographs of actors, and his name escapes me because it's about 2 years ago, but I promise you I've shot one of your students because he was telling me about your art.
Miigwech Fairbrother?
Say the first name?
Miigwech? Miigwech?
Yeah,
Might have been Miigwech, one of my black belts, yeah.
that makes sense. So
Yeah, you said 2 years. I've had a lot of actors come through the school over the years, but Miigwech's the most recent one. He's really up and coming, so good for
I
you.
love that.
Great
Yeah,
guy.
yeah, yeah. So we've interacted, and we may have even passed each other in that building. But let's get to you. So what was it like for you growing up, and what brought you into your first martial arts environment?
I would right off the bat say it would be my uncles, my father as well. Not so much that they were martial artists, but they were men of uniform, and I've always had a lot of respect for that when I was young. So I'm from an area that's about 2 hours outside of Winnipeg, an area known as Long Plains or near Dakota Teepee. So it's like if you took Highway number 1 east or Highway number 1 west, you just kept going towards Alberta or Saskatchewan, it's along that way. So those are old horse routes, trading and cart routes that are now a highway, right? So when you think of anything on open territory, all the highways are technically were carts and horses and walking, and all that was done. And the highways of yesteryear were all the rivers. So when you think in waterways and things like that in Manitoba, you have 100,000 lakes. So that's how we got around at those times, was through canoes or some of these roadways. So our territory is located right along the Assiniboine River, and then the Red River is on the other side. And the unique thing about the Red River, and why I bring this up, is because trade was incredibly important in that area. Because people ask, why the hell would you live in Manitoba at that time? Manitoba was, still is the center of Canada, but at that time you had two major rivers. One went all the way up to almost to the Yukon. The other one went almost all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so, Gulf of America. Anyways, Gulf of Mexico. And it's the Red River, and there's only several rivers that flow northbound on the planet, and we didn't know that back then. But the Nile's an example of that moved northbound. The Red River is the other one. So we would have a lot of trade going up from all the way down there up to the Hudson Bay. So that area in Manitoba, which is now a part of places like Winnipeg, Portage-la Prairie, Brandon, all these different areas, were all trading routes that were done with Indigenous people, prior to contact. And so, that stuff is just oral tradition that we've received. Any of the written stuff that we received is when we've had contact. So now we start understanding things, starting to write things down and things like that. So that area, very flat. The joke is, if anyone's been out west, they know you can watch your dog run away for 2 days, right? So it's not like here. It's very, very different. And so I bring that application into Okichitaw when I'm teaching it here. So, a lot of my students are from Ontario or from elsewhere, and they don't have a concept of that territory. So I'm going, why do we do things that way? And I said, well, that's the territory we did it on. And I'm very conscious of making sure that I follow what was taught to me, but also what was told to me through a lot of those stories. So I grew up there till about 11 or 12, and then we moved into Winnipeg. I moved in one of the toughest areas in the city, which was the north end of Winnipeg. I grew up there, and I was there for quite some time. But again, what got me into martial arts, it was the days of, when your dad had that brand new VHS machine, and you would go down to the video store and you'd grab a couple big video cassettes, and you'd run the hell out of it, and it would be all grainy by the time you brought it back to the store because you tried to freeze it on certain martial art moves and everything in the movies and things like that. So I remember doing a lot of that when I was young. But I also had family that were in the military, and they were military guys. So I had my uncle Dennis ended up becoming in the U.S. Special Forces with the Green Berets towards the end of the Vietnam War. As Indigenous people, we bounce between countries, right? So that's a lot of things that, people forget about. My other uncle Vern, he was with the U.S. Airborne, fought in Korea. Dad was with the Canadian Air Force. Uncle Ed was a police officer in Canadian military. So I had a lot of family that were always talking stories and tactics. And when you're around that, it's pretty cool. And you want to be a part of that. And so there was a lot of times where, oh, let's try this or try to get out of this, or how would you hold this if this was coming, if someone was coming at you with this? How would you do it? Like I had a lot of that growing up. And keep in mind that, I was learning how to hunt as a boy between the ages of 9 and 11 years old. So, I mean, take a kid now from the city of Toronto saying, have you been out and shot a deer when you were 11? And they're like, what? I'd never even think of that. Well, I was doing all that. It's just part of our culture. So it's very common. And it still happens today. It still goes on today.
Well, and I want to keep going with your journey, but I was so intrigued when we were doing our research on you and the idea of your ancestry with a direct lineage going back to pre-railroad Winnipeg.
Yep.
And if you look at, I think we're talking about 1870 with that Red River Resistance, and it was just after that the railroad hit Winnipeg. And if anyone reads The Last Spike, Pierre Burton, it's an incredible description of how that all happened. But I mean, when you talk about pre-contact, when you think of the stories you were told, was there a significant change in the way that your culture viewed martial arts when now being part of a Western explosion into your region?
Well, it changed the tactic. The tactics started changing obviously after the horse was introduced, right? But then once you start bringing in steel and firearms, it starts changing the whole application. Your enemy can be further away, or you have to use applications of bravery. So your warfare applications and your martial tactics change. So could we practice how we practiced in 1879 or 1865? Absolutely not. Like today, I just walk up the store and I decide to practice like that. Toronto police are showing up. What are you doing?
Right.
What are you doing? And we've had that, guys. We've had that in parks where we've been training. So, having said that, when you have a pre and post contact, you have contact, but we don't really consider it contact until it's basically where it's like downtown Toronto. It's like you drive away, you haven't been down there for a while, you drive downtown, you go, when did they put that condo up? That's the concept of contact. So think about it that way. When did they build these 8 condominiums? Like, oh my God, like that's contact. Where you're away for a period of time, or you're embedded with another nation for a period of time because of hunting, survival, subsistence, things like that. And then you come back and all of a sudden all these things are built, right? And the railroad is an interesting one, and I don't want to go down a history lane or whatever, but you do bring that up, is that, the primary push on that railroad was for, the Northwest Rebellion in 1885, with Poundmaker, Big Bear, Riel and all those guys. They were, causing grief for the Canadian government, push the railroad through so we can, crush this resistance. And then people forget that at that same time, 1879, in that period, you had the Custer was wiped out in Wounded Knee, Greasy Grass, that battle. So this is the Canadian government looking at the United States, are going, we don't want to, Big Bear and Poundmaker to be like Sitting Bull. And Sitting Bull comes up to Canada. Like, it's a different time, gentlemen, like at that period. It's just incredible. And I think a lot of that history is not accurately taught. It's getting better. It's getting better. There's a lot of good writers out there. But at the same time, a lot of that history was, we embedded with us. We were talking about all the time. We knew the stories, but they just weren't shared. You go to school and you hear about it, and you're just looking. I remember those days, getting pulled out the reserve to go to school in Portage Prairie, hearing the stories about stuff, and I'm just going, "That's my family you're talking about." Okay, so it's this is a reason why we keep a lot of stuff suppressed as well. And I hear stories like this in other parts of the world where they actually hid their martial arts as a result of they could get killed if they shared it, or they displayed it at all, or any type of armament. And Okichitaw was the same thing. Anything that was done with worthy men, that's our application of Okichi-taw was hidden from a non-Indigenous society. We didn't start teaching this openly till 1990, right? We didn't really start doing it openly till then. And then we didn't really start pushing it till 95, 97, so it's like, that's why we've been so quiet. There was no internet when we were doing this back in the day.
Well, we don't mind the history, and part of the reason I'm so excited to chat about it with you, my great grandfather was alive. My dad's older, and he was alive in the 1870s, my great grandfather in Ireland, by the way.
Yeah.
But you know what you're talking about goes back to what Hanshi talked about in our opening round the horn, which is you're directly descended not too many generations from an art that
Hmm.
was life or death, that
Absolutely.
was full survival. And so for me, that's intensely fascinating. And you don't need to worry about breaking that open even more if you like,
Hmm.
because, you know, when we started with that Indigenous topic, I didn't realize how rich it was going to be in terms of your direct
Hmm.
attachment to a place that was literally trying to suppress you as a people and you needing an art that could defend yourselves.
Well, and again, you know, you run into the challenge of, you know, North America. You know, if you look at Canada, the United States, and throughout Mexico, and even the edge of South America, you had over 500 different indigenous nations around then, right? Once you start getting into contact, yeah, there's sickness and things like that. But what starts happening is that if I see that you're a good fighter and I know that you can help me deal with this enemy, I'm going to say, listen, why don't you come to me? I'm going to give you a couple horses. These are my daughters. Once you get a few of your guys to join us, and we're going to go after these guys. And that's basically how intertribal warfare worked. And once you start getting contact, the sickness and everything else, like the armaments start changing, those nations really start, you know, clinging in together, or they start really supporting each other. So when you look in the Northern Plains, you had specific nations that were very powerful: the Cree, the Blackfoot, and the Sioux, right? And they were powerful. And there's other nations that were down in towards the Midwest and in the South that were a little weaker, but they still attacked. You come back after a huge nation like that, they just hammer them. And so, you know, our problem that we had historically was with the Sioux. And, you know, so in our distant cousins, or the distant cousins of the Sioux, were now aligned with us, which was the Assiniboine, right? So you had the Cree Métis in Manitoba, the Red River Métis, the Métis in that area, that were aligned with the Plains Cree, that were also aligned with the Assiniboine, that would do anything they can to protect themselves from the Sioux. And the U.S. cavalry hated the Sioux. And we went, well, as soon as the U.S. cavalry deals with them, the better. So, you know, be honest with you, like, this is real history. And
Yeah.
so, you know, there was a time that one of the last intertribal fights that occurred, they happened anywhere between 1850 to about 18, even after Confederation. We had some out in towards Saskatchewan and the edge of Alberta. But one of the last ones that was tied to our family, that was prior to, say, something like the Red River Rebellion, would have been the Battle of Pilot Mound, or we call it Little Dance Hill. And this what had to do with the fact that we were out buffalo hunting in September. I think it was around 1854, 1856. We lost two scouts that went out to go fetch some water and find out where fresh water was near Barber Lake. They never came back. We sent additional scouts out to look for them, realized that there was a band of almost 600 Sioux on the south side of the mountain, on the south side of Pilot Mound. And so the captain of the hunt and the individuals that were responsible for running the war party were our ancestors, was my ancestors, Baptiste. And he says, he says, enough's enough. We're going to hit him in the morning. And that's what they did. 1,400 guys against 600, you know?
So then, you know, when we think about, let's say, martial arts with, you know, Japanese having the sword
Yeah.
rights and Okinawans not, let's say, for hundreds of years, and that really shaped the arts. There must be real specific shaping of indigenous martial arts in terms of how different tribes or bands were fighting one another, or was it relatively the same type of style?
Well, I'll get into an application called Pacama in a moment, because it's very unique to the Plains, and I think you guys will really enjoy this. And the reason why I pulled some things together for you guys to give you some visual impact on some of these items. But the application of warfare was very similar to how the British observed combat in places like New Zealand when they saw different indigenous tribes, where you would have your one or two or three lead warriors come out yelling at each other from across a distance, and then a volley of arrows and an absolute rush of warriors coming and smashing into each other, just like a Viking crash, you know? And that's what it was done. Until the horses were involved in the Plains, we kind of fought that way. So even the war shields and things that we used started shrinking as a result of our mobility and our way that we move things. So do I have to carry this anymore? Maybe not. Can I make it smaller? Yeah, let's make it smaller. How do I use it? Use it for deflection now, not so much for full impact. Like, that starts changing. When it comes to the hand-to-hand tactics, it was reckless bravery. There's no question. And the idea is that there's certain warriors that you would identify in the Plains. So you're going, do I really want to mess with this guy? Or I do want to mess with this guy because I want to count coup to have that song written about me, so to speak, right? So that's the other side too. So it's our application of being really brave, not stubborn, but brave. And the old saying of never pick a fight that you can't win. We didn't care. We always knew that regardless of what would happen to us, we knew that the creator was on our side for this conflict and that he would make the choice whether or not we go to the next journey, not us. So the idea behind that is always have a good fight. So the Cree saying, we say, make my enemy strong, courageous, and brave, for if I defeat him, I will not be ashamed. So the idea is we never want an easy fight. We make it hard. If you're going to make it easy, I'm not going to waste my time, right? And the Cree also had another saying where you say it's easy to be brave from a distance. So yeah, you can hit me with an arrow from 200 yards away. Okay, come and say it right here. Touch me with your coup stick, right? So that's a whole other application. So it is again the application of reckless bravery. Now, the idea of uniqueness in warfare, everyone would be outfitted with a war club. The design was very similar to that of a rifle. The ball-headed war club was applied, but it looked more like a polo stick in the Midwest, in the Northern Plains. Here in this territory, they really like the ball-headed war club. So you'll find the Mohawks all the way to the Mi'kmaq, like right across the territory, eastern, all the way across. They really enjoyed the ball-headed war club. That was their application, and it primarily has to do with the type of woods they could harvest to be able to make that weapon. Very effective in combat. But out west, what was really, really interesting was the gunstock war club. And in Cree, we called it Notina Tonemistik, which means gunstock war club. And it was a reflection of the musket. That's basically where it came from. And if you look at the early versions of it, it looked like the older versions of the musket. As the musket started evolving, where you're looking at the brown best land musket, when it started changing to that rifle, the gunstock war weapons looked just like them, like the rifle musket, the butts, eh? So this weapon, I still teach it to this day. It's a unique weapon because unlike a tomahawk, and in Cree we call that chikunakinis, lance or battle lance is known as shukikwan, and we had different lengths of lances and used for different things as well. And then obviously mokim, the knife, right? We had different applications of knives. But the gunstock war club was something that was very personalized. Like you would personalize this, like you'd have the training blade on the end of it, in the elbow, and then you would actually outfit the weapon with different brass tacking and things like that. You could have scalps on it, different feathers, things like that, but not so much interference that would affect your movement of the weapon, right? So when you're seeing replicas and they got lanyards on them, or a lot of shit hanging off them, like that's just not real. That's just not real, because you want something that is going to be really efficient, very mobile, and has the capability of conflicting with another weapon to relocate it, or impact power, or lethality, So I'll give you an idea of what it looks like. So let me show you here. Let me just close that. This is what it looks like here. So
Wow.
yeah, so that's a gun stock here. So this would be your trading blade here, shikwan, and then the curve here, kieto, all right, and then the handle, mieto, right, and then the wood here. This is hornbeam, so it's Manitoba hornbeam, like we call it Manitoba ironwood. So this is really heavy. So this probably weighs, and this is a smaller version. We have longer versions of this, but this probably weighs almost 2 pounds, right? So it's quite a heavy weapon. So when you're blocking and redeflecting, it's really good for this top point, and then it has lethality of the blade. So you don't use the blade all the time. You use the blade if you want to run by with a horse, you can drag it, or you can strike or impale. And with the deflection, you can actually knock the weapon out of the way, relocate it, and then strike with the blade again. So the unique thing with the gunstock war club, it hits with such power because a lot of, like, if you think of a hammer, and even with a tomahawk, you just take a standard tomahawk like this, and then you kind of know, if I put my hand in this position, I strike, I know where I'm going to feel impact. The unique thing with the gunstock war club is that you swing and you start pulling back because of this, but you don't realize that there's another 6 or 8 inches that have already dug into your opponent. And there's stories of guys hitting horses with this, like when they've been knocked off their horse, then they hit the horse across the jaw with this thing. So it's pretty brutal. So it's the only weapon out of everything, or the only implement out of everything that we've had that wasn't also used for harvesting. So the tomahawk could be used to set up camp. It could be used for, we could take the blade, do skinning with it. We could take a lance, we could hunt with the lance. We could, go after bison or small game. Arrows, same thing. Knife, we could cut and everything else like that, or use it in combat. But the gunstock warclub, no tinaktonim stick, was only built for warfare. It wasn't built for anything else except warfare. And so I'm sure for some of you guys that are, dealing with your weapon crafts, that particular item was only built for warfare. And so that was the application with the gunstock warclub. There's other things that we might have changed. The arrows are different for warfare versus for harvesting. There's some changes there. But a lot of everything that you'll find in the plains is much longer. Even the lances. This would be a bison lance. So look at the length of that. And that's what would have to be sunk into a bison when you're riding by. And when I'm out doing workshops, I'm trying to explain the size of a bison to some people. And excuse me.
Is that blade you just showed, is that something that's thrown, or do you ride up and impale them?
Both. Both. Yeah. So this would, you can have a short one like this. You have a short one like this, and you'll like this version. So this one would be your shorter version. It's again very heavy, so that blade is very similar to this one. This one's a little longer, obviously. You can see the difference in the length. And this one, you actually would ride on a horse at full stop, and just think of a torpedo being launched from a speedboat. You drop it, you chase right up, you run down your enemy if they're on foot, and you would just drop it, and it would just go right into them at 45, 60 kilometers an hour. So that's how that would work.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying you didn't propel it forward further with your arm?
Yeah, you just would drop
it.
it. Yeah, you just drop it. Yeah.
Amazing.
And then the throwing ones, you start getting into this size, like that, with this type of thing, with this type of blade. We call this a tenton style. The idea is that it sticks in, so when the person drops, it holds the blade, and so you know where it is when you ride it around, you come back, and you want to take it back. It's the idea behind that. And then, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
This is you veered dangerously into my territory. Is this only used for bison? I mean, do you know if they hunted
Absolutely.
other plains game with this equipment?
Yeah, so the thin one that I just showed you, that would be more to do with deer, things like that. And there's a lot of games that are teaching guys how to actually throw properly from a distance. We didn't really, in the northern side, we didn't have an Adlel. Like you hear a lot of that application down in the south, we didn't have that. So people talk to me about that and go, well, we didn't really use that application. Either you could throw or you couldn't. But there's other games like Chunky, we call it, where you're rolling a stone, you try to hit the stone. And so they teach the boys at a very young age how to throw properly. But then so when you're thinking of lances, there's 3 different versions. One is the short version, the one is the hunting version, and the other one is what we call the identifier lance. So the lance that I would be carrying on the plains could be anywhere. This one is about 8 feet, so I can't even get it in the screen, but it just shows you. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so that shows you that blade there. So this one's very, very tall. And the idea behind that is you would actually put your identifiers on it, which would be your different feathers. And so I come across your tribe or your party, whether it's mobile or a war party, I could come across you and I can identify what nation you're with by seeing your lance that would be up on your horse. So your horse is anywhere between 5.5 to 6 feet high, right? And then you're sitting on a mounted steed, and then you take that lance, you put it up another 14 feet. So almost 25, 30 feet in the air, and you're actually seeing from a distance. I'm going, well, I know what war party is coming in. We can identify that lance by the way the feathers would be on the side that would be dressed. Did that as well. There's applications for the feathers, but I can talk to you about that in a sec.
Well, it's just appropriate you went to this because my wife actually is watching the show, and she texted me separately saying, "Can he show us any of these weapons?" And then perfectly, you picked up the first one.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to put one of my gaggers in front of you here, so I remember this story because I think you guys will really appreciate that. But I could like elaborate on the feathers if you'd like. I think it's fascinating if you'd like to hear about this for a second.
Oh yeah.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that was unique in the Plains, gentlemen, was something we called counting coup. Okay. And counting coup, the application is called pakama. And pakama started becoming a practice that started occurring probably right when Britain and France were fighting for possession of the continent. So it would happen anywhere between 1850 to 1860. They figure that that time period started happening in an area that was creeping into the Midwest. It started becoming a full thing in the 1800s. And the application of counting coup was to strike your enemy without killing them, with the intent of having the bravery to walk up to them and touch them with a coup stick, and leave without being mortally injured. Okay. So my Uncle Ted would say it was the most aggressive form of tag you could ever imagine. So you would go up to your enemy, and it could be their defensive works, it could be their horse, it could be them. They fell off their horse during a conflict, and you would ride by and you'd touch them with your coup stick. And there's nothing, and it just would infuriate your enemy. And it would have to be witnessed by someone within your own tribe. Your own war party would actually have to witness it for you to be rewarded accordingly afterwards. And this is an application that was only done in the northern Midwest. Like, it was the only application that was done. When you talk about other nations throughout North America and South America, when I talk about this to other Indigenous community members, they're fascinated by it because it's just something that was never done. And so the idea was, if you saw your enemy at this application, you would identify whether or not this person is intent on killing you. And if they are, is there a way that you can avoid being killed and go up to them, touch them, and then leave without being mortally injured? And so the story of the coup stick is quite fascinating. But you can use anything for coup. The most bravest one was to get off your horse, hold your horse, and touch your enemy on the ground if they got knocked down. That was the hardest thing to do, because other warriors would want to frickin' kill you because you're touching one of their own. And they believed that you touch someone, you would take their power. And they didn't want you to take their power. So that was part of it. So warfare for us was a very spiritual experience, and I'm sure it was for a lot of other nations as well. But as Indigenous warriors, we've always had the saying where we believe that we're spirits having a human experience. And you understand that? So it's a different way of looking at it culturally. So try to apply that to warfare, and it makes it much more unique. Now, the feathers, we could identify another warrior from a nation. I would say you'd go far down as maybe South Dakota, just at the bottom of South Dakota, throughout Montana, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and a little bit of Minnesota and maybe Ontario, just a bit. That pocket, so if you looked at the Canada-US map, it would kind of look like a wobbly T, that territory there, the Northern Plains. And every nation followed this process of the coup feathers. So I'm going to walk through these quickly so I don't eat too much of your time up, guys, but I think you can see all those right now. So if you notice, I've listed them from the application of how they were applied. So something like this, where you see one marking on the side, two markings, and three markings, this would indicate if you had one, that you counted one coup. So it was witnessed that you were in conflict against another nation. You walked up and you smashed someone, and you were able to receive this feather afterwards. And you could actually use this feather. You could put it in your hair. You could put your feather on your coup stick. You could tie it to your horse. You could put it to your war shield, wherever you like, but you would present it. So next time someone saw you, they knew that you counted one coup. Now, when you wore them in the hair, there was a very specific way of wearing them. So for example, in the Plains, if we held the feather straight up, it indicated that I counted one coup. And the Cree and the Assiniboine did the same thing, is that if you turned it at 90 degrees, it meant I counted two coup. My dad would always joke saying that we only did that. We're one of the only nations that did that because we were cheap. We didn't want to give another feather. And these are replicas, guys. I don't use real feathers for this, but just for replica purposes and teaching purposes. And then you would go to one coup, two coup, three coup, or this could be 2, 4, and 6. So if you saw a guy that had feathers like this on the side, if you had a guy that was sitting like this and he was facing you, you could see that, he counted, there's 3 there, right? Another 4, right? That's how many coup he counted. Now, as you got more aggressive in combat and you had more experiences, you would have a whole variety of different feathers that would run along here. And so what starts happening is this type of thing is where you've taken something from them. So this cutout section here indicates that you removed something from them. So you broke their breastplate, you took their weapon, you took their horse, you ripped part of their braid off or whatever. Like any of those types of things that would indicate that. this type of feather, my uncle would always say, Uncle Ted would say, watch out for this guy because don't hang around with him because he gets wounded all the time. That's what this feather indicates, is that you've been wounded severely, but you've survived. So this could be a guy that's been shot. He could have been hit with an arrow or he got, cut really bad. So that indicates that he's been wounded severely, but he survived. And so this is a very spiritual feather because it would indicate that he wasn't ready to be called home yet, This one, you usually had it with your special guys. And what I mean by special guys, we don't really have a term of special forces, but the individuals that would go into camps, whether they steal horses or go after the enemy during dark hours, this is indicating that you would go in kind of scalp if you had to. Okay, so this could happen in open field warfare. And the other cut feather indicate that you slit the enemy's throat. That's what this one is. So when you see the clip off the top, that would indicate that. So there was individuals, you'd see warriors with some of these, like 4 of those. That means that they slit like 4 guys' throats, and it was witnessed. That's what they only saw within their party. He may have done more, but these are all been witnessed. So think of it like medals from the military. These are the medals that we used historically. So I could look at another warrior, I could look at another fighter from another nation, and I could identify how good they were in combat. And this one here, this would indicate that you killed an enemy, right? So if you look at this type of application and give you guys an idea, Sitting Bull had 72 of these. Okay, and he survived that, 72. Yeah. So
I don't want to disagree with your Uncle Ted, but I kind of do want to be with the guy who has the bad luck. He's going to be the one the lightning hits, right? Like, you're okay if you're with that guy. Hanshi, I know you have a question you want to throw to Okimakhan.
Yeah, I hope yeah. So I see that there's all sorts of recognition, and you could tell different tribes by their arrows, etc.
Yep.
Could that what is the significance of that during war? Because say you raided someone, and then they recognize you through that, wouldn't they be able to retaliate at some other time?
Yeah.
Would you not seem to not want to be recognized when you have, say, like a party that goes behind the lines
Yeah, so I mean, what you're talking about is like where you could have a situation where you're harvesting, right? You're just out there on a hunt, right? And the thing is that you're trying to be, we knew each other's territories to the point that if you go beyond that hill or you go behind that tree line, or if you're on the other side of that river, you're in Sioux territory, and so you better go on the numbers, you better be prepared, type of thing, right? So it was some of that, and I think the difference is that the closest thing that we came to that, sir, was we would actually leave items behind, letting them know that we were in the area, which would freak them out, right? So, like we could lay down a particular implement or a type of coup, or even a marking that would on a rock or a side of a tree that let them know that we passed through here. So, and they would see that the next morning. They'd wake up and they like, holy shit, they went through here last night. We go, yeah. So, and they did it to us too. Like it worked both ways.
Yeah, but if it was during wartime, and you'd want to cross the enemy line or something, and say wipe somebody out. I don't know how to say it without sounding. Why would you want to be recognized as the people who did that, whereas they may come back on some of your people?
Well, yeah, and I think it's also understanding Indigenous warfare as well, that it was how it was done on the plains, is that it was very much a a revengeful application as well. There's times where there's so much history that's there between these nations that your leadership within your community has said that these are your mortal enemy, and if you do face them, you have to let them have it. And so unfortunately, that's the way it was. And imagine a society now coming from the West or Europe and saying, we did that 1,000 years ago. Why are you guys still doing this? And, so a lot of that applications, it's just the same history. It's just a different part of the globe. We're nations just because the way you look, the way you held your hair, the way you painted your horses, you're in contravention of what we believe in, and some of these types of things, right? So there's stories where we never went up a certain area in the northern area of the plains past the tundra because of the Inuit that we know now, no problem, but we didn't like them. Like we didn't like the Inuit. We didn't, they kind of were weird to us. We didn't understand them. So the stories, when you hear about these stories, like you don't go up there. You don't go up there. Like, it's almost like ghost stories, right? Things like that. And so whatever they did, it worked, kept nations out of their communities. Now, when you talk about being stealth wise and how we actually did that in certain conflicts, we did travel during dark periods as well at night. But also we did unique things where, we didn't do what we call shadow signaturing. Like, you could be on the open plains, and if you're riding if the moon's out or whatever, you can actually see someone coming. We would actually use different waterways and knolls and things like that to start moving through the territories. So throughout Saskatchewan, Manitoba, you got, everything in Saskatchewan, like the Cabell Valley and all those areas, you could actually hide a whole, unit of like 20 to 200 people going through those areas. And what started happening when you start pushing into the 1800s, the war parties got big. Like they got really big. Like it wasn't like 20 guys like you see in the movies, the black and white movies. I mean, these were like hundreds of individuals within the camp that were heavily regulated. And, you had individuals that were responsible for different things. So the Cree word for that is what we call Ekwamajik. And we use the same word, Okichitaw, worthy men and the ones who watch over them. So you got the strong warriors, but then the Ekwamajik are the individuals that are actually managing those guys. Like you don't step out of turn, or we'll cut up your jacket, we'll cut up your saddle, we'll take your weapons away, we'll punch a big hole in the side of your lodge. It's stuff like that. So there's accountability there. So everything was done very, very structured. It was not off the cuff. The stuff that was off the cuff was when you came across another party and went, oh man, we got to deal with this. Because if they don't run at you, we're going to, if we don't run at them, they're going to run at us type of thing. So it was always about bravado and making sure that, you could actually get the upper hand. And a lot of times you didn't. A lot of times you didn't. Individuals that you came across were probably, maybe there were some good archers there, or they had a couple more firearms than you did, or they were fast on a horse, or they retreated to a point where they actually acquired additional warriors that came across and they intercepted you. Everything, the mobility of horse was a huge thing on the plains when it was introduced. It changed our whole application. You can move hundreds of kilometers. That changed everything now. So you're going into areas that you never really normally went in the first place, and it was the pursuit of the buffalo, wherever we went. That's what caused us the problems with the Sioux, because once the Sioux started losing all their harvesting applications, they started pushing up into Northern Territory, into places like Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and they were getting hit by the Cree and the Blackfoot. So, the Sioux went everywhere. I mean, there's stories of them going up in Northern Ontario, it's crazy.
We had a question come in about do women count coup, or did women count coup as well?
There was probably one of the last recorded ones was the one war event that I was talking about was the one with Sitting Bull that occurred at the Battle of Greasy Grass, and one of the women there actually was a female warrior, and she was fighting to revenge the death of her husband. And usually this was a normal concept in the plains, where a woman could be and would be readily accepted, but she wouldn't stay. Once that vengeance and that revenge and application was done, then she was requested to go back to her other responsibilities. So we did have female warriors. There weren't a lot, but there were some.
And did they get, do you know of any that also got those feathers, or was that something?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sensei Suino, it's funny because I was going to maybe throw it to you, because what I'm hearing, Okimakhan, is that this is an art derived from long range, medium range, horse,
Yeah.
bladed weapon, to all the way to hand art. And that sounds a lot like the samurai arts from which your sword art is derived, Sensei Suino, as well as the Kyudo you've done. So it sounds to me like not only time-wise in terms of when these things were happening, but also that there's some real parallels in terms of the development of the arts that we now don't need to do that way. Are you hearing any of that, Sensei Suino, or does that, resonate at all?
No, I've been thinking about that all the way along. That whole idea, right? That the archers were were started before firearms, right, in Japan, right? The archers started the battle from a distance. Then the long swords and the spears and the halberds, and then the short swords and the tanto. And of course, they always talk about this concept of armored wrestling, which is called yoroi kumiuchi, right? What do you do when you've dropped all your weapons and
Yeah.
you can't move with alacrity because you've got this heavy armor on? And a lot of the modern systems like judo have techniques, right? The old kata, that they have techniques that harken back to the days of fighting with armor on when you had lost your weapon. But so yeah, Sean, it sounds like there are a lot of parallels.
I like the idea that you brought up the armor because, a lot of the applications that we use in Okichitaw is this unique throw of the knife where we turn the body, and so we'll have a blade like this and we turn sideways to hit right in like this, or we'll grab and we'll shove the blade in this way. And, you'll get some of the Cali guys that are going, well, don't you just kind of want to hook like that? And I'm going, well, it's nice, but I would tell one of the workshops that I do, I'll use an example here, is that this was our standard what we call pipe bone, which is a breastplate. So this is some of the armor that we would actually wear. And you can take this right now. This is very sharp, and I can draw it, and nothing happens. And so some of these cuts and everything would not do anything to you. And that's why a lot of the jagging is done this way. So it goes through the breastplate and obviously through the ribs. So keeping some of those applications are really important because when you get down to the shorter side of things and you're nice and tight with your enemy, you actually have to do these types of tactics. So even the arrows could actually bounce off that. You had to throw a lance a certain way so the blade would end up flat or parallel with the ground, so it would penetrate the breastplate. So it's all these different things that you go, wow, okay. So there's one technique where I've seen it in some film where they try to knock the horses down, for example, and they would slide down and they push the lance into the ground to impale the bottom of the horse, so the horse flies over. We never really did anything like that, but we did it on foot against the enemy, and we would slide like that to impale the enemy if they're coming at you with a shorter lance and making sure that the blade's flat so you penetrate the breastplate. So, and the ribs, obviously. So, and then you could send that person behind you and then grab the end and then just swing it like you're going to hack something else. So the Assiniboine were notorious spear fighters. They were really, really feared on that application. But yeah, so it's fascinating when you think of the history and then you try to say, well, how can I teach that now? I don't want to tear my mats up,
Okimakhan, first off, we had a comment come in from Sensei Scott Bauer in a ninth degree black belt in our club, and he just said, fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for carrying this forward. I want to go back to, partly what Hanshi's question was about the willingness to be seen at a time when perhaps being covert would make more sense. And do you think, because you mentioned faith, you didn't use the word faith, but the deep-seated belief that we're just humans having a spiritual experience, or a spirit having a human experience, and also the idea that the creator decides. And do you think that might be part of the reason why you were willing to be more overt in the past? Because, it needed to be witnessed by the tribe, but also the idea that this is going to work out just fine whether I live or die because of the faith that
Yeah.
the undercurrent, not just of the art, but the culture.
Well, I think one of the things that's important to understand too with Okichitaw and the way we teach it is there's a lot of spiritual connections that are adopted into the training of Okichitaw. So, yeah, we have to have the achievement process where you go through for grading and everything because our modern society understands that. Historically, we did it a different way. You're 12 or 14 years old, we're going hunting for bear today. And you're like, what? Yeah, we're going hunting for bear today. And if you pass that, then you're moving into your next rites of passage. And then we start moving on, We just can't do those things nowadays. Like, it's just not feasible. It's just society's different. So, how do we actually apply that structure for achievement? Through spiritual things. And so one of those is sweat lodge ceremony. I'm sure being at the Native Center, you understand that application. Well, I'm a sweat lodge leader and, we do those things as well, but also land tests. And how were some of those land tests done historically? We actually modify them in such a way that we can actually do them during our tests. So some of these could be the fallen warrior carry, or it could be the Nipi run, or all these different things that were done historically over long distances to prove that this individual was going to be your courier for your community, or was going to be the individual that would go out and harvest on behalf of them, that would stay behind to protect the women and children, like all these different things. And you would identify them through these different applications of tests that were recognized by the leadership within the community. And that stuff was done right up until almost the 1900s, you know? And so take those things, and we can still do them now. We just need land-based to be able to do some of these activities. It's not that you can do it in a gymnasium or anything. And, you know, apply those to your achievement process when you're doing this combative art, this martial art. And that's the closest that we get to that. So, because historically we did it a whole other way. And, you know, with the Asian martial arts, and I just don't mean to package it in that, but what I really appreciate about the Asian martial arts is they developed a structure process to show achievement that the individual has to go through these steps to start moving up to the grading. And I kind of said that that was missing as a result of our history and the collapse of our cultures as a result of colonialism. And so I'm using that application of structure and process from my own experiences of other martial arts to say, this is what we need to do with us, but we're going to do it our way. We're going to do it our way. Right? So do you have to do 300 kicks and 200? No, you don't. And but you have to do this. And so an example of the warrior sweat. The warrior sweat is really tough. And I've seen the biggest men fall in that, and I've seen the weakest women the strongest in it. And, you know, this is something where you have to go through, it's not 2 or 3 rounds, it's 7 rounds, right? 7 rounds with 2 days of fasting before that, another day of fasting afterwards, and then 7 rounds of sweating, which is basically 20 minutes of song and at a temperature that pushes your body way past its regular limits. Like it's you know, what we say Lakota style of sweat lodge. And so, you know, I learned a lot of this from my uncle Vern. He was a leader in it. His picture's in the Native Center. You'll see a good picture of him there. But those types of things, you go through that process, and if you can't get through it, then that's telling me that there's something that's spiritually affecting you on your progress that we need to work on, right? It's not that you're never going to get a chance again. We're going to get a chance again, but you need to work a little bit more on something else. And it may not, you can throw a tomahawk, you can fight pretty good with a knife or whatever. That's great, but there's something there that's preventing you from moving forward. And so these other cultural applications that we have and traditions that we practice really identify some of those shortcomings and some of those gifts, and also some of those creations that a person can have. And remember, Okichitaw is about creation, because you can take 4 of the weapons that we use, the primary, the lance, the knife, the tomahawk, and the gunstock warclub, and you could have 4 different weapons, and it can be moved, you know, multiple different ways by different individuals. And just like anything else in a military unit, you know, yeah, maybe on a battleship, everyone wants to shoot the big guns, but not everyone's good enough to shoot the big guns. Someone's got to steer the ship. Someone's got to move the engine room. Someone's got to feed the sailors. Someone's got to get the emergency craft and the depth charges, right? Like everyone has their role. And in intertribal warfare, it was the same thing. Some of the guys are really good at stealing horses. Some of the guys are really crappy at hunting. Some of the guys are really good at romancing, right? There was all these different things that were happening within the community. But when it came to warfare, and when you would go into enemy territory, you took the individuals that would allow you to survive to come back, because survival was imperative. Survival was imperative, right?
Okimakhan, that is fascinating, and it's time for your 10 questions that we ask all our guests.
Okay.
I do want to let my teachers know that I hope I can one day get my black belt in romancing, because I'd like to be able to bring that to our dojo. Okimakhan, we set these for 10 minutes, so we ask that you answer as impulsively as you can, but feel free to expand on your answer. And you have 10 minutes regardless of how many you get through. I'm not sure we've had anybody not get through 10, but just letting you know that we keep it to that, just so the time is yours. What is your favorite martial arts technique?
Well, in Okichitaw, I would say the knife hack. Yeah, the knife hack. We call it, like, think of a machete and just chop that branch off. That's one of it's graphic. It's just so brutal. And the great thing about it is one of our applications in Okichitaw is where it's a double knife cut. So the weapon comes in, you grab the weapon or the arm, and you just hack, and then just push them away. And it works great with hand-to-hand and just self-defense in general. So yeah, it's one of my favorites in Okichitaw. Like, we have throws and everything, but I love that one, just the hacking up.
Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
Oh, I would say as a young boy, I loved Chuck Norris when I was a kid. I mean, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 63 now, but I remember those days. I just and Bruce. When I saw Bruce a little bit before, I was young, but I still remember it. Um, those are movie martial arts. And it was a big thing for me because my dad was always traveling, and the uncles would be around, away and around and stuff like that. So it was me and a video recorder, watching stuff and things like that. Um, I was always the kind of martial artist in the family, though. Like there was no one that ever really got into the martial arts. There was people that were combative guys because of their military backgrounds and things like that, and they didn't start sharing that till you got a little bit older, or if they were half cut. If they had a few drinks in them, you could start hearing some of the stuff or get thrown around the living room a little bit. But yeah, I would have to say it was, for me, it's Hollywood. My wife teases me about this all the time. Yeah.
Who do you think is the most influential martial artist alive today?
Yeah, it's hard for me now because I hate saying this, but I've been so disappointed in quite a few of them. But I know several guys with combative backgrounds that I have quite a bit of respect for. Avi Nardio, Avi's a good friend of mine. Machado down in Texas, he's training down there now. Respect for these guys because they're dedicated to their arts and things like that. But are they spiritual? Right. And so that's where I'm grasping right now is like who's really out there right now, sharing that traditional and spiritual wealth of those arts histories. I'm kind of lost with that.
You mentioned some of your influences being Hollywood. What's your favorite martial arts movie?
Oh, I don't want to admit it. Above the Law.
Nice.
Early Seagal rocks.
Yeah, yeah. I would yeah. And then, Forced Vengeance, whatever, with Chuck. I mean, there's so many guys. I mean, I'm dating myself here, but yeah.
What do you think is the best thing martial arts has done for the world?
Peace. Yeah, I would say peace. For those who want to stop violence, they have to know it and they have to practice it. And I believe that, I look at it this way. One of the simplest things that was taught to me, and that I kind of relate to my students as well, is that a doctor will go, train for years. Lawyers too, but doctors will go for years and train, become really, really good technicians in their field. They'll work in the emergency rooms and they'll respond to critical incidents and things like that. But a doctor never goes to their schooling and their training to say, I hope I deal with a lot of sick people, right? They never do that. They want everyone to be healthy, but they have these incidents where they have to deal with it. And I think that individuals like ourselves that work in worlds of violence have to understand it really well to prevent it from occurring. And there's other ways of preventing it from occurring as a result of our confidence, our demeanor, our communication tactics, all these different things can prevent it before violence is needed. But if it comes, I feel very sorry for you. Like that's the way I kind of look at life, right? And so it's like I go back to that concept again, right? Make my enemy brave, make my challenge difficult, enduring, complicated, so that when I overcome it, I'll never be ashamed and I'll make myself a better human. So it's absolutely, we've all gone through those highs and lows. It's really important. And I think that martial arts bring peace. I really do. It sounds ironic to a person that doesn't understand it, but I truly believe that martial artists bring world peace.
What advice would you give to your younger self? You get to decide at what age.
Start sooner, George. Jeez, like hey, listen, I started, guys, as a special constable in the reserve. I worked there for quite a while. Right now, what I do for a living, I teach Okichitaw and do other things, but I'm also a federal inspector with the government of Canada, with Transport Canada. So, my enforcement career started quite early, but then I was just trying to do so many different things. I wish I saved more money and traveled more often to really look at the world. It didn't happen for me till quite a ways in life when I could afford it, normally, right? And so you'd see these movies and the stories about other parts of the world, and yet I wish I went there and learned that. And I wish, you look back now and I said, oh, that guy was alive when I was thinking about it. I wish I went and trained with him, right? Or her. Like those are things that I think I would have changed. Absolutely. Yeah. But I wouldn't have changed my wife. So you can't catch me on that one. So
Um, when you go home to Creator, what would you like Creator to say to you?
thank you for honoring your ancestors. Yeah, thank you for honoring your ancestors, George. Because I think that that's when I walk up there and I open that lodge door and step in at that great circle, he's gonna know that I've been doing this work. You know, whatever we do here is going to be a direct reflection where we go. You know, I might have to learn how to ride a horse again, but other than that, I'm ready to meet him. So.
They're making a movie of your life story. What actor do you want to play you?
Miguan.
Nice.
Yeah, he's a good looking guy, better looking than me, that's for sure.
Good looking guy. That's a good guy.
He'd have to grow his hair though, so you know, that's the thing. Yeah.
Our last two questions come as a pair. What is your greatest achievement and what is your greatest regret?
My greatest achievement are my boys, my wife, with our two kids, Julie and Sebastian. Just really proud of them and what they've become. I also think that another part of the greatest achievement is to be able to get Okichitaw recognized by UNESCO, the United Nations for Education, Science, and Culture, and to kind of put egg back on Canada's face to say, listen, here's something that'll play for you. And there was never an open acknowledgement of this, but Canada back in 07 declined the UN Indigenous rights or UN rights for Indigenous people. Canada said no, we're not going to sign off on that. United States said no, Australia said no. Countries that you thought that would say yes, especially Canada and Australia, said no. And at that time, I was already working with UNESCO through an organization in Korea to get O-ki-chi-taw recognized as a tangible cultural component to Canada. And they recognized it, they endorsed it. We gave them all the documentation, a lot of information, history, some oral recordings and things like that. And they said, yeah, we recognize this, right? No different than the Grand Canyon was recognized as a cultural thing. So it was recognized at that point. So when we became recognized at that area, after the change of government, we threw that back. And I was at a meeting in Ottawa with the Assembly of First Chiefs or the Assembly of First Nations. And we were talking about some of those things. And they said, well, these individuals that are responsible for that portfolio are going to be here later today. I said, I'd love to talk to them. So we had a discussion in this conference center in Ottawa. And I was saying, why does Canada not want to recognize the UN rights for Indigenous people? I said, and also they don't even recognize an Indigenous art that's a tangible asset that's recognized by the UN and that type of thing, right? So we talked about it. There was other people throwing out stuff saying that lacrosse should be recognized, and, you know, some activities that were Indigenous as well. And some of our practice, and particularly our languages came into play, obviously, those things. And wouldn't you know, within 24 months, they passed it. They said, yeah, we recognize the UN rights, and they signed off on that charter. And I still think to this day that what I spit out that day around that circle talking with those individuals there, I had some influence on getting that endorsed. So that's pretty empowering. It's pretty empowering.
And regret.
I wish one of the challenges is when you move away for work. So what brought me to Ontario is my career brought me to Ontario in 1990. And a little bit of issues that were happening in Quebec at the time. You guys remember OCA? Okay, so I was a constable at the time, so I was dealing with some of those issues there and also here in Toronto. My regret was didn't spend enough time with people that I should have back out west. That's the thing. And I had a couple opportunities to spend more time with some ones that have moved on. And, you know, you kick yourself a lot of times where you have these stories where you remember as a young boy or even as a young adult, you know, that I wish you spent more time with them. Like I could have spent more time with my mare, who was Ambrose's daughter, who knew all the stories that happened during the rebellion and before Manitoba became Manitoba. You know, the fight against the Orangemen and the exchange of gunfire. And she knew all these stories, and so shared with me. And I'm listening to them as a teenager, and you're kind of wishing that I should have went back I wish, she was up alive longer and things like that. So I always think it's people that have passed on is my biggest regret, that I didn't spend enough time with them. And it's kind of like I think about my boys right now. They're at that age, 27, 30, where they're busy with their careers and their own lives and everything, and we don't see them as often.
Mhm.
And I'm going, yeah, now I know what I was like, that type of thing. So I kind of regret that, it's just,
We really appreciate your 10 questions. And, while we're not trying to compare guests, but most regrets come back to some time,
yeah.
version of time. Um, Speaking of time, we do have a little bit more, but we've spent so much time talking about history, and it's just been riveting. I could do this for hours with you, and I do want to come visit you at the center. But I do want to ask for the last question. How have you found, being a brown belt in judo and a black belt in taekwondo and hapkido, that the arts from other places overlays with your historical and your genealogical art that you've developed and created? I know you mentioned, in terms of ways of thinking about grading, but how have you
Mhm.
found doing those arts that are outside of your culture and your childhood?
I think what's really helped me is what we didn't do. Right. And so what I mean by that is when you think of judo, there's very technical throws that are involved. Hapkido, very specific joint locks, things like that. Taekwondo, the type of kicking, obviously, and some of the striking. Those things were never done. Like historically, in a lot of the stories, a lot of the writings that I had, the discussions that I had with old ones before they moved on, those things weren't there. Even in our lithographs, they're writing on paper and on hide, none of those applications were indicated. It was very carnal, mechanical, striking, throwing, crushing, smashing techniques. And so what I do now is I don't do it anymore, but maybe I would say about 20 years ago, I would catch myself still being influenced by these other arts. And don't get me wrong, I love them. There's certain things that they do with the joint locks or throws or the type of striking. I'm one that's fantastic. But historically, we wouldn't waste our time with that. We just say, if I can't hit him with this, then I'm just going to go and find something I can hit him with. Like I'm going to use something else, or I'm going to fire this if I have to do it. Like whatever I have to do to destroy that, I will do it. And so that whole toe-to-toe thing, it's just something that we don't do. Like we run by, we smash, and we carry on. We hit another couple, and we come back and hit a couple more again. And so the application, what I find with other martial arts is there's a lot of that toe-to-toe sport concept. Okichitaw is no sport whatsoever, and that's why we call it a combat art, because it's just strictly like that. So when we're working with people that are in special forces or any type of tactical things and like that, we always kind of smash our knees into each other because it's a step forward system. We don't go right leg back like in Taekwondo. It's a step forward system. It's grab, throw, smash, that type of thing. So for me, I think the advantage I have is I have the discipline to look at the other martial arts and knowing whether or not that would have been used. That's the first thing. And whether or not that has ever been raised in any conversation, any recording, any painting, any lithograph, any oral tradition. And if it hasn't, then I say that cannot be applied to this. Human body can move a variety of different ways. And depending on the territory where you're applying this type of thing, it does affect the body mechanics of the technique that may be delivered. So you'd use a different bow in the winter than you would in the summer, right? You would use, a gorilla grip to grab something in the winter than you would in the summer. And people go, why? I said, because we never made gloves. We would make a mitt that was like a sock. And a lot of times the thumb would stick out the side. So you think about all these stories and things that were taught to you. Fascinating. An elder would bring that up to me. I'm just saying, well, would you do it? And we would never do that, George. And I said, why is that? He said, because we didn't have the dexterity. We had our mittens. They used to say that the thumb is sticking out the side of the sock. That was our mitt, right? And so how do you grab someone that way? You can't. So it's those things. And so you start reading into it. So when you get these prescriptive applications, I know that they go right out the window with Okichitaw. Unfortunately. Unfortunately, they do. And let's be honest, you have to do that to stay as true and carnal to the application as possible, because then it's very easy to adopt. We've seen that with other martial arts. It's very, very easy to adopt, and you have to be disciplined not to do that.
I think it's beautiful the way you're guarding something so specific and so pure. Um, Speaking of time, I always say I'm very sadly it's real. So I'd like to thank Robert Shlumsky, Justin Shea, Andrei Sadashev, Josh Kitchens, Cristiano Lando, Drita Giuliani, Stavros Tavrulius, Sensei Suino. Give us our
And
last.
Madison Elizabeth Schroeder.
Madison Elizabeth Schroeder. They run the show behind the scenes. We're so
Oh,
grateful.
yeah.
Welcome, Madison. Okimakhan, the way we finish our shows, we do around the horn. So we'll start with Hanshi Legacy. We'll say a little bit about our time with you, including myself, and then you'll have the last word to say
Okay.
goodnight to all our listeners and whatever you'd like to say. So, Hanshi, what do you want to say about our time tonight?
It's very interesting. Um, a lot of different things that you learn. And I want to thank you for an early history of here in North America.
Thank you.
So the things that we never saw or never understood, and sometimes apologize for the things that we done that should have never happened.
Hmm. No.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Suino?
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. This is I'm still I'm not often at a loss for words, but there was so much that came across and there's so much more to go. I would love to have another conversation like this. And we don't have to do it now because I don't want to take up showtime, but I would love to get some recommendations for reading about history and culture from you at some point as well. Anyway, thank you so much. This has been an absolutely riveting hour and a half for me.
Thanks, Sensei Suino. Sensei Dauphin?
Only Okimakhan, you said a lot of things that really resonate with me, especially when it was, and you kept apologizing for being maybe graphic in your description of things. I don't think you need to do that. I really enjoy you being graphic when you were talking about various things. You said at the beginning, historically, they didn't teach things safely.
No.
On this call, we're all about maybe doing things that are not quite so safe when you're in the school training. You said if you practice like 1879, the police are showing up for sure, and they have, and we've had that too. Uh, I love that gunstock war club, and I love when you were talking about it. I love all the honest communication you had about it and the applications of it and how graphic. And I mean, I guess that's one of those things that I say to people all the time when I'm doing Iaido, and I'll explain like a certain movement, like, you're taking a head off, you're taking a limb off here, you're stabbing
Yeah.
this person, and you're doing it sideways because you want to penetrate the ribs. And sometimes people get all like, oh, like, wait. I'm like, it's a sword. Like, this thing wasn't invented for like chopping carrots or filleting fish. Like, it's like the Uzi of its era in its
Yeah. Yeah.
culture, right? Um, I love the discussion of the coup stick and touching your enemy without actually hurting them, and that was a coup. Um, it just honestly, it made me think a little bit of point karate, how people go in there and that's disparaged sometimes, but that's kind of what you're doing when you go in there. You're like
Hmm.
pulling a technique that you're saying, had I landed this technique, you'd be in like serious trouble right now.
Yeah.
Um, I like you said that warriors are spirits having human experience. I'm really going to meditate on that a lot. That's one of those ones I'm going to write on my whiteboard and think about a lot while I'm training. I loved all that lesson about the coup feathers and um, when you just said Sitting Bull had 72 of the. That's incredible. And Suino Sensei and I, when we were in Wyoming
Oh,
last year and we were hiking, we talk about this stuff like it's ancient history. It's not ancient history. Like Sitting Bull is not that many generations behind
no.
us. Like it's not ancient history, it's modern history. Um, uh, I like when you said about O-ki-chi-taw and the modern rites of passage you're developing for that. I think that's awesome. Um, your favorite technique, a knife hack. Such a good technique. Like, I mean, who can argue with that, right? Um, Influential Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee. I love Above the Law. I just am not a big fan of Steven Seagal, but I love
Yeah.
that movie. It's
Yeah,
just a
same
great
here.
movie. Um, again, when you said the best thing it's done for the world is peace, that's yeah, you got to know war to know peace. Just like you can't know light without dark, and
Mhm.
you all of those dualities have to exist, or you don't really know it, do you? Your greatest regret, spending time with people out west and learning more. I just thought of my grandma, and I just thought like she used to tell me so many stories, and I was young and I just didn't really pay attention.
Yeah.
I really wish I could have those stories back. Like they're just snippets in my brain that I should have, would have, could have wrote them down. You know, um, good for you for getting your art recognized, and congratulations on being proud of your wife and your boys as your greatest achievement. And thank you so much for coming on. I really do hope I can make it to. I don't know if you demonstrate or you allow people to see your art, but I would be like honored and fascinated to see it if that opportunity ever presented itself.
Thanks, Sensei. I get to speak so much throughout the show, but out of the gate, when you said the application of reckless bravery, I wrote that down. I think that's what so many of us are doing here, right? Like, if you're willing to fight, you have some version of a reckless bravery, and then trying to figure out how to apply that in a way that you come out ahead with any version. And the other thing, just I really love how you talked about looking for that spiritual in the modern martial artist, like how that's something that has to be a part of it. And I think that's so important in anything we do. And, we try and maintain that, but it's such a great reminder that with just punching and kicking, we might be missing the plot. So I want to give the last word to you tonight, um, Okimakhan, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to share this one with you. This blade here, guys, is from Manitoba, and it was recovered during one of the combats sessions that occurred up between Saskatchewan and Manitoba in 1899. So this is known as a Plains dagger. So when you're looking at it, you can just see how smashed up the blade is or whatever. So this is a prized heirloom in our family. This is just wood. We have another one that's buffalo, but it's actually at the Royal Ontario Museum right now. So it's kind of being displayed there right now. So yeah, I just share it. So, it's always great spending time with fellow martial artists. I really enjoy hearing things and discussing this. And also having an opportunity for a platform to be able to talk about these things, because a lot of times it was invitational, or we felt that we couldn't really share a lot of these things because our history is always basically saying, well, enough of that. We're not doing that anymore. Move on. It's like when they stopped the ghost dance. It's like you can't do anything. We did go through a period of terror, after 1885, right up to the First World War, because there was just suppression on Indigenous people right after that time. So when you think about from 1880 to about 1900, and when the First World War started, that whole period, you could never even identify yourself as Indigenous. Like you just didn't do it, and you stayed on the reserve. It was just a different time. And for people to really understand what we go through, we're the only nation of people on the planet that have an act, okay, for a specific group of people. It's called the Indian Act. And there was only one other act like that globally, and that was apartheid, that people understood. And so we still have this act in place. It was brought in right at Confederation, and we don't want to lose it, but we don't want to use it either. It's one of those things, right? You're bad with it, you're bad without it type of thing. And my father said one thing: don't ever allow a piece of paper to identify who you are. Allow your blood memory to remind you where you came from. And so I think it's really important for all of us to understand that. And martial arts does that for us. It activates things within us. We move like the people that learned it before us, and we're just reflecting in their shadow what they did historically. I think it's a great thing, and you guys just keep up the great work. Um, and yeah, so as far as workshops and things like that, I do those. And what I like doing with other martial arts schools is because you guys are already disciplined and structured, that we come in with a whole bunch of training gun stocks and we show you a whole bunch of stuff, different tactics. It's a lot of fun to say, can we get away from the discipline today and just beat each other up? Yeah, absolutely. That's when you call in George. So, so let's stay in touch. Let's stay in touch, and then maybe we could do something for you. And yeah, it's just if you're ever coming down, let me know. And then I'll keep you guys posted on our new studio that's opening up because we're going to have an open house there. So
Thanks so much, Okimakhan. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, senseis, and we'll see you next